The thunderstorm caught Lydia Lancaster by surprise, turning the dusty road into a river of mud as she urged her exhausted horse onward through the downpour. The year was 1879, and the Colorado Territory had never seemed so vast and unforgiving as it did on this miserable October evening. Her sodden blue traveling dress clung to her slender frame, and her chestnut hair, once neatly pinned beneath her hat, now hung in dripping tendrils around her face. The meager possessions she'd managed to bring from Boston were tucked in saddlebags, likely as soaked as she was. "Just a bit further, Penny," she encouraged her mare, squinting through the rain at what appeared to be lights in the distance. "Please let that be Loveland," she whispered, her teeth chattering. Lydia had left everything behind: her comfortable life in Boston, her controlling father, and the unwanted marriage he'd arranged with a business associate 30 years her senior. At 22, she decided her life would be her own, even if that meant traveling alone to Colorado to accept a teaching position in the small frontier town of Loveland. The lights grew closer, revealing the outline of buildings. Relief flooded through her as she made out the sign, Loveland, Colorado. But her relief was short-lived. The schoolhouse where she was meant to stay wasn't visible in the downpour, and she had no idea where to find it in this weather. A flash of lightning illuminated a wooden structure ahead, a ranch house set back from a barn. Desperate and shivering, Lydia guided Penny toward it. As she approached, she could see it was a modest homestead with a small corral and barn. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth within. She dismounted with difficulty, her legs nearly buckling beneath her as she approached the door. Taking a deep breath, she knocked firmly, praying whoever lived here wouldn't turn away a stranger on such a night. The door swung open, revealing a tall man holding a lantern. His face was partially shadowed, but she could make out broad shoulders, a strong jawline, and eyes that narrowed at the sight of her. "I'm terribly sorry to disturb you," Lydia began, her voice trembling with cold. "I'm the new school teacher for Loveland. I've just arrived and got caught in this storm. I was hoping—" "Get inside before you catch your death," the man interrupted, stepping aside. His voice was deep, with a rough edge that suggested he wasn't accustomed to company. Gratefully, Lydia stepped into the warmth of the cabin. The interior was simple but clean: a table with 2 chairs, a small kitchen area, a fireplace with a pot hanging over the flames, and a single bed in the corner. A few books sat on a shelf, and a rifle hung over the fireplace. The man set down his lantern and took a better look at her. In the light, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 28 or 30. His hair was the color of dark honey, and his eyes were a striking blue beneath furrowed brows. He wore a simple flannel shirt and well-worn trousers with suspenders. "Xavier Cross," he said, offering no handshake or smile. "And you are Lydia Lancaster," she replied, trying to keep her teeth from chattering. "I'm terribly sorry to impose, but I couldn't find the schoolhouse in this weather," he nodded. "Schoolhouse is on the other side of town. Too far to travel tonight in this storm." He gestured to her drenched clothing. "You need dry clothes." Lydia glanced down at herself and flushed with embarrassment. "I have a change in my saddlebag, but I fear everything's soaked through." Xavier frowned. "Your horse, oh. Penny is still outside. I'll see to her," he said, already reaching for his oilskin coat hanging by the door. "There's a chest over there. My sister left some clothes when she visited last. Help yourself. They might be a bit large, but they're dry." Before she could thank him, he was gone, disappearing into the storm. Lydia stood dripping on the wooden floor, unsure what to do. Finally, she moved toward the chest he'd indicated and opened it. Inside were several simple dresses, a nightgown, and some undergarments. She selected the nightgown and a shawl. feeling strange about borrowing a stranger's clothing, but having little choice. She looked around for somewhere private to change, and finding no other room, quickly stripped off her wet garments behind the privacy of the shawl, changing into the borrowed nightgown. It was indeed too large, but it was warm and dry. She hung her wet clothes near the fire, hoping they'd dry by morning. Xavier returned a short while later, stomping his boots at the threshold. "Your horse is in the barn with mine fed and rubbed down," he said. "Weather's getting worse. You'll have to stay the night." "Thank you for your kindness," Lydia said, clutching the shawl around her shoulders. "I can sleep in the barn with Penny. I don't want to impose further." Xavier shook his head, his expression unreadable. "No need for that. You take the bed, I'll take the floor." Lydia began to protest. "I couldn't possibly. I've slept in worse places, Miss Lancaster," he cut in, his tone brooking no argument. "I'll make up a bedroll here by the fire." Lydia bit her lip, torn between gratitude and discomfort at the impropriety of the situation. But what choice did she have? "Thank you, Mr. Cross. I promise I'll be on my way first thing in the morning." He nodded, then turned away to hang his coat. Hungry, as if on cue, her stomach growled audibly. She hadn't eaten since noon, having planned to reach town before dinner time. "Yes, thank you." Without another word, he moved to the fireplace and stirred the contents of the pot. The aroma of beef stew filled the cabin, making Lydia's mouth water. He ladled generous portions into 2 bowls and placed them on the table, gesturing for her to sit. They ate in silence, the only sounds the howling wind outside and the occasional crack of the fire. Lydia tried not to stare at her host, but she couldn't help noticing things about him: the calluses on his hands, the slight scar that ran along his jawline, the way his eyes seemed to hold something back. "What brings a Boston lady to Loveland?" he asked suddenly, startling her. "How did you know I'm from Boston?" she asked, surprised. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Your accent and those boots aren't made for Western trails." Lydia smiled slightly. "You're observant, Mr. Cross. Yes, I'm from Boston. I've come to teach at the school here." "Long way to come for a teaching position," he remarked. "Plenty of schools back east." Lydia hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger. "I wanted a fresh start," she said finally. "Somewhere different." Xavier nodded, not pressing further. "Loveland's a decent town, growing." The school's new town council finally decided the children needed proper education instead of just working the farms and ranches. "Are there many children?" she asked, grateful for the neutral topic. "Enough to keep you busy." 20 or so, last I heard. Ages 5 to 15, I reckon." "Do you have children in the school, Mr. Cross?" she asked, then immediately regretted it when his expression darkened. "No," he said shortly. "No children, no wife." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry," she said quickly. He shrugged. "No harm done." He stood, collecting their empty bowls. "You should rest. Storm might let up by morning." Lydia nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. The warmth of the cabin and the full meal had made her eyelids heavy. She watched as Xavier laid out a bedroll near the fire, arranging blankets with practiced efficiency. "The bed's all yours," he said, nodding toward the corner. Lydia moved toward it, guilt nagging at her. "I truly don't mind the floor, Mr. Cross." "Xavier," he corrected. "And I'm not in the habit of letting ladies sleep on floors when there's a perfectly good bed available." She smiled slightly. "Then I insist you call me Lydia." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or something more complicated. "Sleep well, Lydia," he said quietly. "Morning comes early out here." She nodded and slipped under the quilt on the bed. It smelled of soap and the outdoors, a clean, masculine scent that she found oddly comforting. Despite her strange surroundings and the storm raging outside, she felt safe in this cabin with this taciturn rancher who'd shown her unexpected kindness. As she drifted towards sleep, she heard Xavier moving about the cabin, banking the fire for the night. The last thing she saw before closing her eyes was his tall silhouette against the firelight, strong and steady in the storm-tossed night. Lydia woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back: the storm, the ranch, Xavier Cross. She sat up quickly, pushing her tangled hair from her face. Xavier stood at the small cookstove, his back to her as he tended to breakfast. Daylight streamed through the windows, suggesting the storm had passed. She noticed he'd already dressed for the day in a clean shirt and denims, his hair slightly damp as if he'd washed. "Good morning," she said, her voice still husky with sleep. He turned, nodding to her. "Morning. Coffee's ready if you'd like some." "Thank you." She stood, suddenly conscious of her borrowed nightgown and disheveled appearance. "I should change. Are my clothes dry?" Xavier gestured to her traveling dress and underthings, neatly folded on a chair near the fire. "Been up a while. Thought you could use the rest." Touched by his consideration, Lydia gathered her clothing. She gestured vaguely. "Take your time. I need to check on the horses." With that, he grabbed his hat and slipped outside, giving her privacy. Lydia changed quickly, grateful her clothes were indeed dry, if slightly wrinkled. She used the small mirror hanging by the door to attempt to tame her hair, pinning it as neatly as she could without her usual toiletries. By the time Xavier returned, she was presentable and seated at the table, sipping the strong black coffee he'd prepared. "Quite a storm last night," he commented, serving up plates of bacon and eggs. "Creeks running high. Road to town might be muddy but passable." "Thank you for letting me impose on you," Lydia said. "I don't know what I would have done otherwise." Xavier shrugged. "Anyone would have done the same." "I'm not so sure about that," she replied honestly. "Many would have sent me to the barn." A flicker of something humor, perhaps, crossed his face. "I may be a bachelor rancher, but my mother taught me better than that." They ate in companionable silence, and Lydia found herself studying her host in the morning light. His features were rugged rather than handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about his face, character etched into every line, those blue eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. His hands, strong and capable, handled his utensils with surprising grace. "So," he said, breaking the silence, "what made you decide to become a teacher?" Lydia smiled, grateful for the easy question. "I've always loved learning. My mother was a teacher before she married, and I suppose I inherited her passion." "There's nothing quite like seeing a child's face when they grasp a new idea," Xavier nodded. "Noble profession. Not easy, though, especially out here." "I'm prepared for the challenge," Lydia said, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. "What about you? Have you always been a rancher?" Something shuddered in his expression. "Not always. Fought in the war. Had other plans after, but life has its own ideas sometimes." Lydia wanted to ask more, intrigued by the hints of a complicated past, but his tone suggested the topic was closed. Instead, she asked, "Is your ranch large?" "Modest," he replied. 200 acres, 30 head of cattle, enough for one man to manage mostly." "It must be lonely," she said without thinking, then blushed at her forwardness. Xavier studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I've grown accustomed to my own company," he said finally. "Town's close enough when I need supplies or conversation." After breakfast, Xavier offered to escort Lydia to the schoolhouse. She accepted gratefully, still uncertain about finding her way around Loveland. They rode side by side, Xavier on his sturdy bay gelding and Lydia on Penny, who seemed refreshed after her night in the dry barn. The morning was crisp and clear, the storm having washed the world clean. Puddles dotted the road, reflecting the blue sky overhead. Lydia breathed deeply, savoring the scent of wet earth and pine. "The town's changed a lot in recent years," Xavier commented as they rode. "When I first came here after the war, it was barely more than a trading post. Now there's a proper main street, church, school, even talk of getting a railroad stop eventually." "How long have you lived here?" Lydia asked. 7 years, he replied. "Bought the land cheap from a widow whose husband was killed by Cheyenne back in '67. She wanted to go back east to her family." "Do you have family nearby?" Xavier shook his head. "Sister in Denver, parents passed on. What about you? Family back in Boston?" Lydia hesitated. "My father," she said carefully. "My mother died when I was 16. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Thank you." She was grateful he didn't push for more details about her strained relationship with her father or her reasons for leaving Boston. As they approached town, Lydia took in the sights eagerly. Loveland was indeed small compared to Boston, but it had a certain charm. The main street featured a general store, a small hotel, a saloon, a church, and various other businesses. People moved about their morning routines, many pausing to look curiously at Lydia and her companion. "Most everyone knows everyone here," Xavier explained, noticing her observation. "New faces stand out." They continued through town, drawing more curious glances. Xavier nodded to several people but didn't stop to introduce Lydia, for which she was grateful. She wanted to get settled before meeting the townspeople properly. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a simple white clapboard building with a bell tower. Behind it stood a small cottage that Lydia presumed was the teacher's residence. Her heart lifted at the sight of her new home. They dismounted, and Xavier tied their horses to the hitching post. "Mayor should have left a key for you," he said, leading her to the cottage door. Sure enough, a key hung from a nail beside the door with a note attached. Lydia read the note aloud. "Miss Lancaster, welcome to Loveland. Please make yourself at home. School term begins Monday next. Town meeting Saturday evening to introduce you to the community. Regards, Mayor Thomas Wells." Xavier nodded. "Wells is a good man, fair. His wife Margaret will likely come by with some womenfolk to help you settle in." Lydia unlocked the door and stepped inside. The cottage was small but neat, with a front room that served as both parlor and kitchen, and a door that presumably led to a bedroom. The furniture was simple but adequate: a table and chairs, a small sofa, a cookstove, and shelves for books and supplies. "It's perfect," she breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Xavier remained in the doorway, hat in hand, looking somewhat out of place in the feminine setting. "Need help bringing in your things?" "I don't have much," Lydia admitted. "Just what's in my saddlebags." "I plan to purchase necessities here. General store's well stocked," he said. "Lee Miller, who runs it, can help you find what you need." An awkward silence fell between them. Lydia suddenly realized this was goodbye and felt an unexpected reluctance to see him go. This gruff rancher was her first friend in Loveland, though friend might be too familiar a term for their brief acquaintance. "Thank you again, Mr. Cross Xavier," she said, meeting his eyes. "For everything." He nodded, turning his hat in his hands. "Anyone would have done the same," he repeated, but they both knew that wasn't necessarily true. "Perhaps," she said with a small smile, "but it was you who did, and I'm grateful." Something in his expression softened. "You should be all right now if you need anything." He trailed off, then seemed to think better of whatever he was going to say. "Town's friendly enough. You'll settle in fine." With that, he placed his hat on his head, gave her a nod that might have been a bow in another man, and turned to leave. "Xavier," Lydia called impulsively. He paused, looking back at her. "Will I see you at the town meeting Saturday?" A shadow of something crossed his face, reluctance, perhaps. Don't usually attend those affairs, he said. Then, after a pause, but might make an exception this time. Before she could respond, he was gone, untying his horse and mounting with fluid grace. He tipped his hat to her once, then rode away, leaving Lydia standing in the doorway of her new home, watching until his figure disappeared down the road. The days passed quickly as Lydia settled into her new home and prepared for the school term. True to Xavier's prediction, Mrs. Wells and several other ladies from town visited that first afternoon, bringing food, linens, and offers of assistance. Lydia was grateful for their kindness, though she found herself comparing each new acquaintance to the taciturn rancher who'd given up his bed for her during the storm. She learned bits and pieces about Xavier Cross from the townswomen, though they seemed to know little about him beyond the basics. He kept to himself, they said. Came to Loveland after the war, bought the old Peterson place, worked hard, paid his debts promptly. No family except a sister who visited occasionally. No participation in town socials or dances. Shame, really, Mrs. Wells had commented while helping Lydia arrange her few books on the cottage shelves. Handsome enough man, and that ranch of his is turning a decent profit. Could have his pick of the single ladies if he showed the slightest interest. Perhaps he prefers solitude, Lydia suggested, trying to sound casual. Mrs. Wells had given her a shrewd look. Perhaps, or perhaps he's carrying something from the war years. Many men came back changed. She'd quickly changed the subject then, moving on to discuss the upcoming school term and which families had children of school age. By Saturday, Lydia had familiarized herself with the schoolhouse and prepared lesson plans for her first week of teaching. She'd spent a considerable portion of her savings at the general store, acquiring necessary household items and a few new garments more suitable for frontier life than her Boston attire. Lee Miller, the shopkeeper, had been friendly and helpful, offering credit until Lydia received her first month's pay, which she politely declined. The town meeting was to be held in the church, the only building large enough to accommodate most of Loveland's residents. Lydia dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep blue that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes, and pinned her chestnut hair in a simple but neat style. She was nervous about meeting so many new people at once, but also excited to officially begin her new life in Loveland. The church was already filling when she arrived. Mayor Wells, a portly man with friendly eyes and an impressive mustache, greeted her warmly and introduced her to Reverend James Porter, who would be conducting the meeting. "We're delighted to have you, Miss Lancaster," the Reverend said, clasping her hand. "Education is essential for our growing community." "Thank you, Reverend. I'm honored to be here," Lydia replied sincerely. As more townspeople arrived, Lydia found herself the center of attention, receiving introductions and welcome wishes from all directions. She struggled to remember names and faces, though she paid particular attention to the parents of her future pupils. Throughout it all, she couldn't help scanning the room for one particular face, but there was no sign of Xavier Cross. The meeting began with a prayer, followed by various town announcements and discussions. Mayor Wells eventually called Lydia forward to introduce her formally to the community. "Miss Lydia Lancaster comes to us highly recommended from Boston," he announced proudly. "She holds a teaching certificate from Massachusetts Normal School and has experience teaching children of all ages. We're fortunate indeed to have attracted such a qualified educator to our humble town." Lydia stepped forward, heart pounding. "Thank you, Mayor Wells, for that kind introduction. I'm delighted to be in Loveland and look forward to working with your children. Education is not merely about reading and figures, it's about preparing the next generation to build upon the foundation you've established here. I promise to dedicate myself fully to this important task." Her simple speech was met with enthusiastic applause. As she stepped back, the church door opened and a tall figure slipped in. Xavier. Despite the dim lighting, she recognized him immediately. He stood at the back, making no move to find a seat, his hat in his hands. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and he gave her a slight nod. Her heart inexplicably lifting, Lydia smiled in return before turning her attention back to the meeting. But she remained acutely aware of his presence at the back of the room, even as discussions turned to matters of town business. After the meeting adjourned, people lingered to socialize. Several mothers approached Lydia to introduce their children, who regarded their new teacher with mixtures of curiosity and shyness. She made a special effort to remember each child's name, asking them questions about their interests and previous schooling. All the while, she was conscious of Xavier standing apart, exchanging brief words with the few men who approached him, but making no effort to join the general socializing. She wanted to speak with him, but felt oddly nervous about doing so in front of the entire town. The decision was made for her when Mrs. Wells appeared at her elbow. "Come, my dear. We're having a small reception at our home, nothing fancy, just coffee and cake to welcome you properly." "That's very kind," Lydia said, glancing toward the back of the church. Xavier was already slipping out the door. "If you'll excuse me for just a moment." Before Mrs. Wells could respond, Lydia made her way quickly through the crowd toward the door. Outside, the evening air was cool and fresh after the stuffy church. Xavier was untying his horse from the hitching post. "You came," she said, approaching him. He turned, seeming unsurprised to see her. "Said I might." "I'm glad you did," she said honestly. "I wanted to thank you again for your kindness the other night." Xavier shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing to me," Lydia insisted. "A stranger in a strange place, caught in a storm, your hospitality meant everything." He studied her face, his expression softening slightly. "You settling in all right?" "Yes," she nodded. "Everyone's been very welcoming. The schoolhouse is lovely and the cottage is perfect for my needs." "Good," he said simply. An awkward pause ensued. Lydia wished she could think of something clever or interesting to say, but her mind was strangely blank under his steady gaze. "Well," he said finally, mounting his horse. "Best of luck with the teaching." "Wait," Lydia said quickly. "Will you be at church tomorrow? Perhaps we could." She stopped, suddenly uncertain what she was proposing. Xavier looked down at her, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "Don't often make it to Sunday service," he said. Then, after a pause, "But I suppose the Lord might appreciate my presence now and again." Was that the ghost of a smile on his lips? Before she could be certain, he tipped his hat to her. "Good evening, Miss Lancaster." "Good evening, Mr. Cross," she replied, watching as he rode away, a solitary figure against the purpling sky. "Miss Lancaster," Mrs. Wells's voice called from the church steps. "Are you coming, dear?" Lydia turned, composing her features into a pleasant smile. "Yes, of course." "Thank you for your patience." As she followed Mrs. Wells and the others toward the mayor's house, Lydia found her thoughts lingering on the enigmatic rancher. There was something about Xavier Cross that intrigued her, not merely his handsome features or his unexpected kindness, but the sense of a deeper story behind his reserved demeanor. A story she found herself increasingly curious to uncover. True to his word, Xavier appeared at church the following morning, clean-shaven and dressed in what was clearly his Sunday best, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders well, if a bit snugly, suggesting it had been some time since he'd worn it. He slipped into a pew at the back, just as the service was beginning, drawing curious glances from the congregation. Lydia, seated near the front with the Wells family, felt her heart quicken when she spotted him. Throughout Reverend Porter's sermon on community and fellowship, she was acutely aware of Xavier's presence behind her, though she resisted the urge to turn and look at him directly. After the service, parishioners gathered outside to socialize in the pleasant autumn sunshine. Lydia found herself surrounded by well-wishers and parents eager to discuss the upcoming school term. She answered their questions patiently, all the while keeping an eye out for Xavier. She finally spotted him speaking with Reverend Porter, their expressions serious. The conversation appeared brief but cordial, ending with a handshake. As Xavier turned to leave, his eyes found hers across the churchyard. After a moment's hesitation, he changed direction and approached her. "Miss Lancaster," he said, nodding politely. "Fine service today." "Indeed," she agreed. Reverend Porter has a gift for relating scripture to everyday life. "First day of school tomorrow," he commented. "Feeling prepared as possible," she replied, "though I'm sure there will be surprises." A small smile touched his lips. "Always are with children." "Do you like children, Mr. Cross?" she asked, genuinely curious. Something flickered in his eyes, pain perhaps, or regret. "Never had much occasion to be around them," he said carefully, "but I respect their directness." Lydia laughed softly. "That's diplomatically put." "They can indeed be startlingly direct." Mrs. Wells appeared at Lydia's elbow. "Miss Lancaster, you simply must join us for Sunday dinner. Mayor Wells insists." "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose," Lydia began. "Nonsense. We'd be delighted," Mrs. Wells said firmly. Then, noticing Xavier, she added with evident surprise, "Mr. Cross, how nice to see you in church today. You're welcome to join us as well, of course." Xavier cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Appreciate the offer, madam, but I should be getting back to the ranch." "Cattle don't observe the Sabbath, I'm afraid." Mrs. Wells nodded, unsurprised by his refusal. "Another time, perhaps. Miss Lancaster, shall we?" Lydia hesitated, torn between accepting the kind invitation and a strange reluctance to end her conversation with Xavier. "Actually, Mrs. Wells, I've just remembered I promised to review my lesson plans once more before tomorrow. Would it be terribly rude if I declined?" Mrs. Wells looked disappointed but understanding. "Not at all, dear. Your dedication to your pupils is commendable. Another Sunday, then." As Mrs. Wells walked away, Xavier raised an eyebrow at Lydia. "Didn't actually have plans, did you?" Lydia felt her cheeks warm. "Is it that obvious? To me, maybe. Not to them." He studied her for a moment. "Why'd you refuse?" Lydia wasn't entirely sure herself. "I suppose I wanted a quiet afternoon to gather my thoughts before school begins," she said, which was at least partially true. Xavier nodded. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "I was heading to check my north pasture fence. Decent view of the valley from there. If you'd care for a ride." The invitation surprised her, but Lydia found herself nodding before she'd even fully considered it. "I'd like that very much." They retrieved their horses from the hitching posts, drawing curious glances from departing parishioners. Lydia was conscious of the town's eyes upon them, but found she didn't particularly care what they might think. She was new in town and free to choose her own acquaintances. They rode in companionable silence for a time, leaving the town behind and following a well-worn trail that wound through aspen groves golden with autumn color. The day was crisp and clear, the sky an impossible blue above the mountains that dominated the western horizon. "It's beautiful here," Lydia commented, breathing deeply of the pine-scented air. "So different from Boston." Xavier glanced at her. "Miss it?" She considered the question. "Certain aspects, the libraries, the theaters, being able to purchase anything one might need, but there's something confining about city life. Out here one can breathe," he nodded, seeming to understand perfectly. "That's why I chose it. After the war, couldn't abide enclosed spaces. Too many people, too much noise. Were you at Gettysburg? She asked carefully. And Antietam, Chancellorsville, Cold Harbor. His jaw tightened. Saw more in 4 years than any man should see in a lifetime. I'm sorry, she said softly. My brother fought as well. He came home, changed. Xavier studied her. He make it through all right, in body, yes, Lydia said, in spirit. She shook her head. He drinks too much now. Has nightmares. Our father doesn't understand, thinks he should simply buck up and resume his place in the family business. Some wounds don't show, Xavier said quietly. Doesn't make them less real. That's exactly what I tried to tell father, but he wouldn't listen. Lydia sighed. It was one of many things we disagreed about. Xavier seemed to sense her reluctance to elaborate further and changed the subject. Ridge up ahead gives a good view of my north pasture. Creek runs through it, good water for the cattle. They crested the ridge, and Lydia gasped at the vista that opened before them. The valley stretched below, a patchwork of meadows and woodlands. A silver ribbon of creek wound through it, and in the distance, cattle grazed peacefully. Beyond, the mountains rose in majestic splendor, their peaks still bearing traces of last winter's snow. Oh, Xavier, she breathed, forgetting formality in her awe. It's magnificent. He dismounted, then came to help her down from her horse. His hands at her waist were strong and steady as he lifted her effortlessly to the ground. For a brief moment, they stood close, his hands lingering perhaps a second longer than necessary. Lydia felt her pulse quicken before he stepped back, clearing his throat. Found this place my first week here, he said, leading her to a flat boulder where they could sit comfortably. Come here sometimes to think, or not think, depending on what's needed. Lydia settled beside him, arranging her skirts. I can see why. There's a certain perspective one gains from such a view. Xavier nodded. Makes a man's troubles seem smaller. They sat in silence for a while, watching an eagle soar on thermals above the valley. Lydia found herself stealing glances at her companion, noting the way the sunlight caught in his hair, the strong profile against the blue sky, the capable hands resting on his knees. May I ask you something personal? She said finally. He turned to look at her, wariness in his eyes. You can ask. Might not answer. Fair enough, she acknowledged. I was wondering. Why did you come to the town meeting last night and church today? Mrs. Wells seemed surprised to see you. Xavier was quiet for so long that Lydia thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, wanted to make sure you were settling in all right. The simple honesty of his response touched her deeply. That's very kind of you, he shrugged, seemingly embarrassed. Not really, just seemed like the decent thing. After a pause, he added, and maybe I wanted to see you again. The admission, delivered so matter-of-factly, made Lydia's heart skip. I wanted to see you again, too, she admitted. That's why I declined Mrs. Wells's invitation. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of a connection neither had anticipated. Xavier looked away first, focusing on the distant mountains. Should probably check that fence, he said, rising. Need to be back before dark. Lydia stood as well, brushing off her skirts. Of course, and I really should review those lesson plans. They remounted and rode down into the valley, following the creek to where a fence separated Xavier's property from the neighboring ranch. He dismounted to inspect and tighten a few loose wires while Lydia waited, admiring the peaceful scene around them. On the ride back to town, they spoke of more commonplace matters: the weather, the approaching winter, the types of crops and livestock raised in the area. Lydia found she enjoyed Xavier's company immensely. Though not talkative when he did speak, his observations were thoughtful and often laced with a dry humor she found appealing. As they approached the edge of town, Xavier slowed his horse. People here like to talk, he said carefully. Being seen riding together on a Sunday. We'll start gossip, Lydia finished for him. I understand. Perhaps it would be best if we parted here. Xavier studied her face. Don't want to cause you any trouble. Teaching position comes with certain expectations. Yes, she agreed reluctantly. Though I confess I find such social constraints rather tiresome. A smile tugged at his lips. Rebel at heart, Miss Lancaster. Perhaps a small one, she admitted, returning his smile. But you're right. Best not to give the town gossips more fuel than necessary, at least until I've proven myself as a teacher. They paused at a fork in the road. The left path led into town, while the right continued toward Xavier's ranch. Thank you for showing me that beautiful spot, Lydia said. I enjoyed our ride very much. As did I, Xavier replied, his eyes warm as they met hers. Good luck tomorrow with the children. Thank you. She hesitated, then added impulsively, perhaps we could ride again sometime. Xavier's expression softened. I'd like that. After a pause, he added, Saturday afternoons I usually finish my work early, if the weather holds. Saturday, then, Lydia agreed, her heart lightening at the prospect. With a tip of his hat, Xavier turned his horse toward home, while Lydia continued into town, already looking forward to Saturday with an eagerness that both thrilled and alarmed her. The first week of school passed in a blur of activity. Lydia found herself with 23 pupils ranging in age from 5 to 16, with widely varying levels of previous education. Some of the older farm boys had attended school only sporadically between planting and harvest seasons, while others had benefited from regular instruction from the previous teacher or educated parents. Despite the challenges, Lydia discovered she loved teaching in Loveland even more than she had in Boston. The children, though occasionally rowdy, were eager to learn and refreshingly direct in their questions and observations. By Friday afternoon, she had established routines, assessed each child's abilities, and begun to tailor her instruction accordingly. She also found herself counting the hours until Saturday, when she would see Xavier again. Though she chided herself for such schoolgirl anticipation, she couldn't deny the flutter of excitement she felt whenever she thought of their planned ride. Saturday dawned clear and mild, perfect riding weather. Lydia completed her household chores and lesson preparations with unusual efficiency, then changed into her riding habit, a practical dark green garment she'd purchased from Lee Miller's store. Xavier arrived precisely when he'd said he would, appearing at her cottage door at 2 o'clock. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His shirt was crisp, his hair neatly combed, his boots polished. Afternoon, Miss Lancaster, he greeted her, hat in hand. Ready for that ride? Indeed, Mr. Cross, she replied with a smile. Let me just get my hat. They rode west from town, following a different trail than before. Xavier pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area, an old mining claim now abandoned, a stand of trees where wild turkeys roosted, a rocky outcropping where mountain lions sometimes sunned themselves. You know this land well, Lydia observed. Xavier nodded. Man should know every inch of his territory, my father always said. Spent my first year here just exploring, learning the lay of the land, where water flows in different seasons, which paths are passable in winter. Your ranch is beautiful, Lydia said sincerely. You've built something to be proud of. A shadow passed over Xavier's face. Still a work in progress. Wanted to have more accomplished by now, but he trailed off. But, Lydia prompted gently. Xavier was quiet for a moment, then said, had a partner once. Friend from the war, Thomas Blackfield. We pooled our savings, bought the land together, had big plans. He paused, his jaw tightening. 2 years in, fever took him, 3 days from healthy to gone. Took me a while to find my footing again after that. I'm so sorry, Lydia said, moved by this glimpse into his past. You must have been very close. Like a brother, Xavier confirmed. Saved my life at Cold Harbor, dragged me half a mile with a bullet in his leg. His eyes grew distant with memory. Good man. Deserved better than he got. Lydia reached across the space between their horses and briefly touched his arm. I'm sure he would be proud of what you've accomplished in his absence. Xavier looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. Something in his expression softened. Maybe so, he acknowledged. Thomas never was one to dwell on setbacks, always looking forward, making plans. They continued riding, the conversation turning to lighter topics. Xavier asked about her first week of teaching, and Lydia entertained him with stories of her pupils' antics and insights. She found him to be an excellent listener, asking thoughtful questions and remembering details she'd mentioned in passing. They stopped at a small, clear lake nestled among pine trees. Xavier produced a simple picnic from his saddlebag: bread, cheese, apples, and a canteen of fresh water. Hope you don't mind eating simple, he said as they settled on a fallen log by the water's edge. Not at all, Lydia assured him, accepting the food gratefully. Some of my happiest childhood memories involve picnics much like this one. Your family enjoyed the outdoors? Xavier asked. My mother did, Lydia replied, her expression softening with memory. She would pack a basket and take my brother and me to the public gardens whenever the weather permitted. Father rarely joined us, too busy with business matters, but those days with Mother were magical. She sounds like a remarkable woman, Xavier commented. She was, Lydia agreed. Kind, intelligent, always curious about the world. She encouraged my love of books and learning, even when Father thought too much education unsuitable for a young lady. Xavier's brow furrowed. Your father didn't approve of your teaching ambitions, Lydia sighed. Father had very specific ideas about a woman's role. He tolerated my education as a sort of hobby, but expected I would marry as soon as a suitable match could be arranged, then settle into managing a household and producing heirs. And that didn't appeal to you, Xavier observed. The marriage part might have, with the right person, Lydia admitted, but Father's idea of suitable and mine differed considerably. He valued business connections and social standing above character or compatibility. Xavier was quiet for a moment, processing this. That why you left? An unwanted match, Lydia nodded slowly. Father had arranged my engagement to Mr. Harold Winthrop, his business partner, a man of 52 with 2 grown children and a reputation for coldness toward his first wife. God rest her soul. Xavier's expression darkened. Old enough to be your father. Indeed, Lydia agreed. When I protested, Father made it clear I had no choice in the matter. The contracts were drawn up, the announcement prepared for the newspaper. So I did the only thing I could think of. I applied for teaching positions as far from Boston as seemed practical, withdrew my savings, and left in the night with only a letter of explanation. Brave, Xavier said, his eyes reflecting admiration. Takes courage to leave everything familiar behind. Or desperation, Lydia said with a small smile, but I don't regret it, not for a moment, especially now that I've seen Loveland and met. She hesitated, suddenly self-conscious. Met such kind people here. Their eyes held for a long moment. Xavier leaned slightly toward her, then seemed to think better of it and straightened, clearing his throat. Better head back before the light fades, he said, rising from the log. Day's getting shorter now. The ride back was quieter, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached town, Xavier once again suggested they part ways before reaching the main street, and Lydia reluctantly agreed. But this time, before they separated, Xavier asked, Would you care to join me for dinner tomorrow? At my ranch. The invitation surprised and pleased her. I'd like that very much. I'll come for you after church, he said, if that suits. Perfectly, Lydia replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. As she rode the remaining distance to her cottage alone, Lydia acknowledged to herself what she had been reluctant to admit. She was developing feelings for the solitary rancher, feelings that went beyond friendship or gratitude. Whether anything could come of those feelings remained to be seen, but for now, she was content to enjoy his company and the connection that seemed to be growing between them with each meeting. The following day, Lydia attended church with a light heart, looking forward to her dinner with Xavier. She wore her best dress, a deep burgundy that complemented her fair skin, and took extra care with her appearance. Several people commented on how well she looked, with Mrs. Wells noting approvingly that the Colorado air clearly agreed with her. Xavier sat in his usual spot at the back of the church. They exchanged only the briefest of greetings after the service, mindful of curious eyes, but the warmth in his gaze when he looked at her made Lydia's heart beat faster. "I'll be by in an hour," he said quietly as they parted. True to his word, Xavier arrived at her cottage precisely an hour later, driving a buggy rather than riding his horse. He had changed from his church clothes into clean work clothes, a blue shirt that matched his eyes, dark trousers, and a less formal vest than he'd worn to church. "Thought the buggy would be more comfortable," he explained as he helped her up to the seat. The ride to his ranch was pleasant, the autumn afternoon golden with slanting sunlight. Lydia found herself studying Xavier's profile as he drove, admiring the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. Once or twice, he caught her looking and smiled slightly, making no comment but seeming pleased by her attention. Xavier's ranch house looked different in daylight than it had the night of the storm, smaller perhaps, but well maintained, with a neat yard and freshly painted trim. A large oak tree shaded one side of the house, and late blooming wildflowers lined the path to the door. "It's lovely," Lydia said sincerely as he helped her down from the buggy. "Been working on it," Xavier replied, looking pleased at her approval. "Put on a new roof last spring. Added the porch last summer." Inside, the cabin was much as Lydia remembered, though tidier. A fire burned in the fireplace despite the mild day, taking the edge off the autumn chill. The table was already set for two, with what appeared to be Xavier's best dishes. "Hope you like venison," he said, moving to the stove where several pots simmered. "Shot a buck last week. Meat's good this time of year." "I'm sure it will be delicious," Lydia assured him, touched by his evident efforts to prepare a special meal, and indeed it was. Xavier proved to be an excellent cook, serving tender venison steaks with roasted potatoes, carrots from his garden, and fresh bread that he admitted sheepishly he'd purchased from Mrs. Miller at the general store. "This is wonderful," Lydia said after her first few bites. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "Army," Xavier replied. "Was a cook's assistant for a while, then later necessity. Man living alone either learns to cook or eats poorly." They talked easily throughout the meal. Xavier asked more about her teaching, and Lydia shared anecdotes about her students. In turn, he told her about his cattle, his plans for expanding his herd, and the challenges of ranching in Colorado's variable climate. After dinner, they moved to the fireplace, where Xavier had arranged 2 chairs facing the flames. He offered her coffee, which she accepted gratefully. "Thank you for inviting me," Lydia said as they settled into comfortable silence. "It's been a lovely day." Xavier studied her over the rim of his coffee cup. "Been thinking," he said after a moment. "About," she prompted when he didn't continue. "About you," he admitted, setting down his cup. "About us. These past few weeks." Lydia's heart quickened. I've been thinking about that too, she said softly. Xavier leaned forward, his expression earnest. I'm not a complicated man, Lydia. Don't have fancy words or education like you, but I know what I feel. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. Haven't felt this way about anyone since before the war. Didn't think I would again. And how do you feel? Lydia asked, hardly daring to breathe. Like maybe I've been waiting for you without knowing it, he said simply. Like maybe you're what's been missing here. He gestured around the cabin. Built all this thinking it was enough. Now I'm not so sure. Lydia set down her coffee cup with slightly trembling hands. I came to Loveland looking for independence, for a fresh start, she said carefully. I wasn't looking for attachments, but then I met you and suddenly… Suddenly what? Xavier prompted, his eyes intent on her face. Suddenly independence doesn't seem quite so important, she finished. Or rather, it seems compatible with caring for someone. Xavier reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers. I care for you, Lydia Lancaster, more than I probably should after such a short acquaintance. But there it is. I care for you too, she whispered, her heart full. He leaned closer, his eyes searching hers. May I kiss you in answer? Lydia leaned forward, meeting him halfway. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, the kiss chaste but lingering. When they parted, his eyes were darker, and his hand had moved to cup her cheek. Been wanting to do that since the town meeting, he admitted, his voice rougher than usual. Lydia smiled, her cheeks warming under his touch. I'm glad you waited until now, she said. It was worth the anticipation. They spent the remainder of the evening talking by the fire, learning more about each other, occasionally lapsing into comfortable silences. Xavier told her more about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his difficult relationship with his father, his close bond with his sister. Lydia shared stories of her brother's antics before the war, her mother's gentle wisdom, her own dreams for the future. As the fire burned down to embers and the hour grew late, Xavier reluctantly suggested it was time to take her home. Town gossip's one thing, he said. Don't want to compromise your reputation. The drive back to town was peaceful, the night sky ablaze with stars. Xavier's arm around her shoulders kept her warm against the evening chill. Lydia leaned against him, savoring his solid presence, her mind full of possibilities she hadn't considered before this evening. At her door, he kissed her again, less hesitantly this time. When can I see you again? He asked, his forehead resting against hers. I have school duties all week, she reminded him. But perhaps Friday evening, or Saturday. Friday, he decided. I'll bring supper here if that's acceptable, save you cooking after a week with the young uns. Lydia smiled. That sounds perfect. As she watched him drive away, Lydia felt a surge of joy unlike anything she'd experienced before. She had come to Colorado seeking independence and purpose. Now, unexpectedly, she had found something else as well, the possibility of love with a man as steadfast and true as the mountains themselves. The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Lydia's life. By day, she taught her students with enthusiasm and dedication. Evenings and weekends increasingly belonged to Xavier. They established a routine of sorts: Friday evening suppers at her cottage, Saturday rides or drives exploring the countryside, Sunday dinners at his ranch after church. As autumn deepened toward winter, their feelings for each other grew stronger. Xavier began joining in more community activities, attending the Harvest Festival in October, helping with the church's wood-gathering expedition for the winter, even reluctantly participating in a town meeting where road improvements were discussed. People will think I've gone soft, he grumbled as they walked home from the meeting, his hand warm around hers in the chilly evening air. They'll think you're taking an interest in your community, Lydia corrected him with a smile. Is that so terrible?" He looked down at her, his expression softening. "Reckon not, if it means more time with you." Their courtship progressed with a sweetness and simplicity that Lydia treasured. Xavier was not a man of many words or grand gestures, but his actions spoke volumes the way he always arrived exactly when promised. The thoughtful gifts he occasionally brought her: wildflowers gathered from his pastures, a handcrafted bookshelf for her growing collection of books, a warm shawl when the weather turned cold. The gentle way he treated her, always respectful of her independence while making no secret of his feelings. For her part, Lydia found herself falling deeply in love with this quiet, honorable man. She loved his strength and self-sufficiency, but even more his unexpected gentleness and the glimpses of vulnerability he showed only to her. She loved watching him with animals, the patient way he handled even the most skittish colt, the gruff affection he showed his dog, an aging shepherd named Scout. She loved his dry humor that emerged more frequently as he grew comfortable with her. Most of all, she loved the way he listened to her, truly listened, valuing her thoughts and opinions even when they differed from his own. The first snow fell in early November, blanketing Loveland in white. School continued, though attendance became more sporadic as winter made travel difficult for families living far from town. Xavier worried about Lydia walking to and from the schoolhouse in the cold, and took to driving her in his sleigh when the snow was deep. "You'll spoil me," she protested one morning as he helped her up into the sleigh, tucking warm blankets around her. "That's the general idea," he replied with a rare, full smile that made her heart skip. As Christmas approached, excitement filled the town. The church organized a holiday program featuring the school children, and Lydia spent extra hours helping her pupils practice their recitations and songs. Xavier, to everyone's surprise including his own, found himself recruited to build the stage and backdrop for the performance. "Never thought I'd be hammering together a manger scene," he commented wryly as they worked together one evening after school. "Thomas would have found this highly amusing." Lydia smiled, handing him another nail. "I think he would be proud of you for helping." Xavier paused, hammer in mid-air. "Maybe so," he acknowledged. "He was always more sociable than me. Said one day I'd need to learn to get along with folks besides him and the cattle." "Wise man, your friend," Lydia observed. Xavier nodded, his expression thoughtful. "He was. Wish he could have met you, he'd have approved." The Christmas program was a resounding success. The children performed admirably, the church was filled to capacity, and afterward, the entire town gathered for a festive supper in the hotel dining room, which had been decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the occasion. Xavier sat beside Lydia at the community table, more at ease among his neighbors than she had ever seen him. He even joined in the singing of carols, his deep baritone surprisingly melodious. Later, as they walked through the snowy streets toward her cottage, Xavier seemed unusually quiet. Lydia gave his arm a gentle squeeze. "Is everything all right?" He nodded, then stopped walking, turning to face her in the moonlight that silvered the snow around them. "Been thinking," he said. "A dangerous pastime," she teased gently. A smile touched his lips. "So I've been told." He took both her hands in his expression growing serious. "Lydia, these past months have been, I don't have the words, never thought I'd feel this way." Lydia's heart began to race. "Neither did I," she admitted softly. "I love you," he said simply. "Think I have since that first night when you showed up at my door drenched and still managed to look like the prettiest thing I'd ever seen." Tears pricked Lydia's eyes. "I love you too, Xavier. So much." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. In the moonlight, Lydia could see it was a ring, a simple gold band with a modest diamond that caught the light as he held it between them. "Belonged to my grandmother," he explained. "My sister sent it when I wrote to her about you." He took a deep breath. "Lydia Lancaster, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Joy bubbled up within her. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, with all my heart." Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her feel cherished beyond measure. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Never thought I'd find happiness like this," he murmured. "Especially not with a Boston schoolteacher who expected to sleep in my barn." Lydia laughed softly, remembering that stormy night that now seemed so long ago. "Thank goodness you gave me the only bed and said you'd take the floor." "Best decision I ever made," Xavier replied, kissing her once more before they continued their walk through the moonlit night, their future stretching before them as bright and promising as the stars overhead. They were married on a crisp, clear day in early April, with the mountains still snow-capped, but the valley beginning to green with spring. The ceremony took place in the church, filled to capacity with townspeople who had come to respect the schoolteacher and the once reclusive rancher who had gradually become integral parts of the community. Lydia wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Wells and several other ladies had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Xavier, handsome in a new suit, watched her walk down the aisle with an expression of such wonder and love that several of the older women dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Reverend Porter spoke of love, commitment, and building a life together. When the time came to exchange vows, Xavier's strong voice never wavered as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Lydia for all his days. Lydia's response was equally clear and certain, her heart full to overflowing as she pledged herself to this man, who had become her entire world. The town celebrated their union with characteristic enthusiasm, a feast at the hotel, dancing in the street to fiddle music, toasts and well wishes from everyone. Through it all, Xavier kept Lydia close, his hand rarely leaving hers, his eyes returning to her face again and again as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. Late in the evening, they slipped away from the festivities, boarding the same buggy that had taken them on their first official outing, now decorated with ribbons and flowers by the schoolchildren. They drove the familiar road to Xavier's ranch, now their ranch as husband and wife, the future bright with promise before them. At the threshold of their home, Xavier paused, then swept Lydia into his arms with surprising grace for such a practical man. "Welcome home, Mrs. Cross," he said, carrying her inside. Lydia wrapped her arms around his neck, her heart so full she could hardly speak. "I love you, husband," she whispered against his lips as he set her gently on her feet in the cabin that had witnessed the beginning of their journey together. "And I love you, wife," he replied, drawing her close. "More than I ever thought possible." As night deepened around them, they discovered the joy of true union, body, heart, and soul entwined in the most sacred of bonds. In the quiet aftermath, lying in each other's arms in what was now their bed, Lydia thought back to that stormy night when she had appeared on his doorstep, soaked and desperate. "Did you ever imagine, that first night, that we would end up here?" she asked, her head resting on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. Xavier's hand stroked her hair gently. "Can't say I did. Was too busy trying not to notice how pretty you were, even dripping wet." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "But I'm mighty glad it turned out this way." "As am I," Lydia murmured, contentment washing over her. "As am I." The years that followed brought changes, challenges, and abundant joy to the Cross Ranch. Lydia continued teaching until the arrival of their first child, a son they named Thomas Xavier, in honor of Xavier's fallen friend. He was born on a winter's night during a snowstorm that reminded them both of their first meeting, with the local midwife and Mrs. Wells in attendance while Xavier paced anxiously outside the bedroom door. When at last he was allowed to enter, Xavier approached the bed with uncharacteristic tentativeness, his eyes widening at the sight of his wife holding their newborn son. "He's perfect," Lydia whispered, tired but radiant. Xavier sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand with one calloused finger. "He's so small," he marveled as the infant reflexively grasped his finger. "Strong grip, though. Like his father," Lydia smiled. Xavier's eyes met hers, filled with emotions too deep for words. "Thank you," he said simply, leaning forward to press a gentle kiss to her forehead. "For him, for everything." Young Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious child with his father's blue eyes and his mother's inquisitive nature. Lydia found motherhood both more challenging and more rewarding than she had anticipated. Xavier proved to be a devoted father, patiently answering his son's endless questions, teaching him about the ranch, carrying him on his shoulders to see the new calves in spring. Their family expanded again 2 years later with the arrival of a daughter, Eliza Marie, named for both their mothers. Where Thomas was serious and thoughtful, Eliza was all laughter and mischief, wrapping her father around her little finger from the moment she first smiled up at him. "She's going to be trouble," Xavier predicted as he watched 3-year-old Eliza attempting to climb onto her father's horse. "Like someone else I know," Lydia replied with a meaningful glance at their son, who at 5 had already displayed a tendency toward daring exploits. Xavier chuckled, catching his daughter before she could fall. "Reckon between the two of them, they'll keep us on our toes for years to come." The ranch prospered under their joint care. Xavier expanded his herd and added horses to his stock, developing a reputation for raising quality animals that brought buyers from as far as Denver. Lydia contributed by keeping the books, suggesting improvements to the operations, and eventually starting a small garden business, selling vegetables and flowers in town during the summer months. They faced challenges as well: a harsh winter that threatened their cattle, a drought year that tested their reserves, a fever that swept through the town and touched their family when Thomas fell ill at age 7. Through it all, they faced each difficulty together, their bond strengthening with each obstacle overcome. As the children grew, Lydia resumed teaching part-time, focusing on the older students while a younger woman handled the primary grades. Xavier continued to expand the ranch, eventually purchasing the adjoining property when their neighbor decided to move back east. "Getting to be quite the operation," Mayor Wells commented during a visit to inspect the new barn Xavier had built. "Started from almost nothing, and now look at you." Xavier glanced at Lydia, who stood nearby with Eliza on her hip, Thomas proudly showing his grandfather Wells the new foal he'd helped deliver. "Had help," he said simply. "Right kind of partner makes all the difference." The town of Loveland grew and changed around them. The railroad finally came through in 1886, bringing increased commerce and new settlers. The school expanded to 2 rooms, then 3. The church added a bell tower. The single dusty Main Street became a proper network of roads with boardwalks and gas lamps. Through it all, the Cross family remained a cornerstone of the community. Xavier, once the solitary rancher who avoided town gatherings, eventually served on the town council and later as a deacon in the church. Lydia, besides her teaching, helped establish the town's first lending library and organized a women's aid society that assisted families in need. Their children thrived. Thomas, serious and responsible like his father but with his mother's love of learning, excelled in school and developed a keen interest in veterinary medicine. Eliza, bright and sociable, drew people to her with her warm personality and quick wit, reminding many of her Aunt Catherine, Xavier's sister, who visited regularly from Denver. On their 10th anniversary, Xavier surprised Lydia with a trip to Denver, their first real vacation since their marriage. Catherine took charge of the children and the ranch, insisting they take a full week for themselves. In their hotel room after a night at the theater, another first for Xavier, who had endured the cultural experience with good-natured resignation for Lydia's sake, he presented her with a small velvet box. Inside lay a delicate gold locket, more elegant than anything he'd given her before. When she opened it, she found a tiny portrait of their family on one side, a photograph taken the previous Christmas, and an inscription on the other. To L, who made a house a home, all my love, X. Tears filled Lydia's eyes as she looked up at her husband. It's beautiful, she whispered. Help me put it on. As Xavier fastened the clasp at the nape of her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin, Lydia was struck by how much had changed in 10 years and how much had remained the same. His touch still sent shivers through her. His steady presence still made her feel safe and cherished. The love between them had deepened, matured, weathered storms both literal and figurative, and emerged stronger for the testing. Later, as they lay together in the unfamiliar but comfortable hotel bed, Lydia traced the lines of his face in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. There were more creases around his eyes now, silver threads among the gold of his hair, but to her, he was more handsome than ever. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Taking in a bedraggled stranger that stormy night, giving up your bed, marrying a headstrong Boston school teacher?" Xavier caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Not for a single moment," he said with quiet certainty. "Best decision I ever made, letting you stay that night. Only wish I'd asked you to stay forever right then and there." Lydia smiled, her heart full. "I might have thought you'd lost your mind if you had." "Probably," he agreed with a soft chuckle, "but I'd have been right all the same." "Yes," she whispered, curling against him. "You would have been." The years continued to pass, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Thomas, after completing his education in Denver, returned to Loveland as the town's first trained veterinarian, eventually marrying the daughter of the local doctor and building a practice that served ranchers throughout the county. Eliza, to everyone's amazement including her own, fell in love with a young minister who came to assist Reverend Porter, now elderly but still serving the congregation. Their wedding, held in the same church where her parents had married 20 years earlier, was the social event of the season. Xavier and Lydia watched their children's lives unfold with pride and occasional bemusement. Did you ever imagine, when Thomas was learning to walk, that he'd become the most respected animal doctor in 3 counties? Lydia asked as they sat on their porch one summer evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Xavier shook his head, a smile playing about his lips. "No more than I imagined our Eliza would marry a preacher and be organizing church socials instead of riding wild horses." "They've surprised us," Lydia agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "But then, life is full of surprises, isn't it? I certainly never planned to end up in Colorado, married to a rancher when I left Boston all those years ago." "Glad you did, though?" Xavier asked, his arm tightening around her. Lydia lifted her face to his, love welling up within her for this man who had been her partner, her lover, her best friend for more than 2 decades. "More than I can possibly express," she said softly. "You and our children, this life we've built together, it's more than I ever dreamed possible." Xavier kissed her then, a kiss full of tenderness and the comfortable passion of long marriage. "Same goes, schoolteacher," he murmured against her lips. "Same goes." As twilight deepened around them, they remained on the porch, hand in hand, watching as the first stars appeared in the vast Colorado sky. Their journey had begun with a storm, a barn, and an act of simple kindness, a man offering his only bed to a rain-soaked stranger while he took the floor. From that unlikely beginning had grown a love as enduring as the mountains that stood sentinel over their lives, a love that had weathered storms, celebrated joys, and embraced whatever the future might bring, secure in the knowledge that they would face it together.